Marden Park, Hampshire, 1856. The boy who would one day inherit the Duchy of Alverton stood beneath the painted eyes of 6 dead dukes and refused to take one more step, not after the picture. His voice was quiet, but the words stopped the great gallery more effectively than a shout. The portrait painter lowered his charcoal. A footman froze beside the tall windows. Lady Lucinda Hawkridge, daughter of the late Marquess of Wexford and cousin to the Duke through the Hawkridge line, turned her head with the slow disbelief of a woman unaccustomed to being delayed by children. Her brother, Lord Algernon Hawkridge, remained near the marble fireplace, one hand resting on the silver head of his cane. Only Miss Harriet Rivington looked directly at the boy. Philip Hawkridge was 8 years old, the only son and heir of Everard Hawkridge, Duke of Alverton. He wore a dark blue coat, chosen for the portrait, and held a wooden toy soldier so tightly in one hand that the carved figure had left a red line across his palm. He was not sulking. Harriet knew the difference. A sulking child looked toward the adults who had offended him. Philip watched the far doors. His shoulders were rigid. His breathing came too shallowly. He was waiting for something. "Philip," Everard said. The Duke stood several feet from his son in formal black, broad-shouldered and controlled, every inch the man society expected to command an estate, a county gathering, and his own household without visible effort. At 42, widowed and disciplined, he had perfected the habit of concealing emotion before others could ask what it meant. "Come here." Philip did not move. "Not after the picture," he repeated. Lucinda gave a small sigh. "Everard, the county has already heard enough about the boy's nerves." Harriet saw Philip flinch. Lucinda continued in the same elegant tone. "Once everyone has seen him standing strong beside his father, no one will speak of grief or nervousness again." Algernon smiled as though the matter were settled. "Precisely. The portrait will be unveiled before the county, and copies will reach London. It is time the world saw that the future Duke of Alverton is perfectly well." Philip went pale. Harriet noticed. Everard noticed something too, though perhaps not the same thing. His gaze narrowed slightly. "Philip." The boy pressed the toy soldier against his chest. "I don't want to." Lucinda stepped forward. "A future duke cannot be ruled by every passing fear." Harriet stood near the edge of the gallery where a governess belonged, close enough to summon, educated enough to trust with the formation of a future duke. Never important enough to be included in the picture. At 35, the daughter of a deceased clergyman, she had learned that a woman without fortune survived, partly by knowing when to remain silent. She had also learned that silence could become cowardice when a child was frightened. The painter cleared his throat. "Your Grace, the light will hold for perhaps another hour." Algernon glanced toward the windows. "Then we should not waste it. Philip only needs to stand still. 20 minutes, perhaps 30. He said no, Harriet said. The words left her before prudence could stop them. Lucinda looked at her. "I beg your pardon." Harriet kept her hands clasped before her. "Master Philip said no, my lady. And that is precisely why you are employed, to persuade him otherwise." Harriet looked at Everard. "Your Grace, may I speak with him?" The Duke's expression gave nothing away. "You may." Harriet approached slowly and stopped several feet from Philip. "May I come closer?" Philip nodded. She lowered herself, not fully kneeling, but enough that she no longer towered over him. "You do not have to explain everything." His fingers tightened around the soldier. "But I need to ask you one question." He looked at her. "Are you afraid of the picture itself?" Philip shook his head. Behind Harriet, Lucinda exhaled impatiently. Harriet ignored it. Then, what are you afraid will happen after the portrait? Philip stopped breathing for 1 second. His eyes moved past Harriet. Not toward the Duke, toward Lucinda. Harriet saw it. So did Everard. Lucinda's face remained composed. This is absurd. He has been indulged too long. Harriet did not turn. Philip, you do not have to answer yet. Yet? Lucinda repeated. How convenient. Philip's lips parted, but no words came. Everard stepped closer. Philip. The boy looked at him. The Duke's voice changed. Not softer exactly, but less commanding. No one will force you to stand for the portrait today. Lucinda turned sharply. Everard. He did not look at her. The sitting is over. Algernon's smile faded. Surely that is unnecessary. My son is afraid. Children are often afraid of nonsense. Then I will discover whether it is nonsense before I punish him for it. Silence spread through the gallery. Harriet looked at Everard with new attention. She had seen powerful men protect reputation. She had seen them protect property. She had rarely seen one stop a public event because a frightened child could not explain himself quickly enough. Lucinda folded her hands. You are allowing one moment of distress to become a household crisis. Everard finally looked at her. No, I am preventing adults from turning it into a performance. Algernon's expression sharpened, but he said nothing. The painter began quietly gathering his materials. Philip moved closer to Harriet. It was only half a step, but Everard saw it. Harriet did too. She did not reach for the boy. She waited. After a moment, Philip held out the wooden soldier. Mama gave me this. Harriet accepted it carefully. The little figure was worn at the shoulders, its red coat chipped, one black boot nearly rubbed to bare wood. He has kept good watch, she said. Philip nodded. Mama said he would. Harriet turned the soldier in her palm. The base shifted under her thumb. She stopped. Philip, does this open? His face changed. Fear returned so quickly that Harriet immediately loosened her grip. I won't open it unless you tell me to. Lucinda took one step forward. What is all this? Philip looked at Harriet, then at Everard. I put something inside. Harriet kept her voice even. You did, he nodded, so she couldn't take it back. The gallery went still again. Everard's gaze fixed on his son. Algernon lowered his cane from the floor. Lucinda's posture became very straight. Harriet asked, Who is she? Philip's face closed. Harriet did not repeat the question. You do not have to tell me yet. Lucinda gave a short laugh. So now silence earns attention. Harriet turned at last. No, my lady. He is being shown that fear will not cost him his dignity. Lucinda's eyes hardened. You forget your position. Harriet felt the familiar warning in the words. Employment, income, shelter, reputation. Every fragile thing a governess possessed depended on someone more powerful deciding she was still useful. She looked back at Philip. No, she said. I remember the child's. Everard's attention moved to her. Something passed across his face, gone too quickly to name. Then he gave an order. Everyone out, except Miss Rivington and myself. Lucinda stared. You cannot seriously mean to exclude family. I mean exactly that. Algernon spoke calmly. Everard, caution is admirable, but a frightened child can misunderstand almost anything. Then, I will not help him misunderstand more by surrounding him with adults demanding answers. Lucinda's cheeks lost a little color. You will regret indulging this. Everard said nothing. One by one, the others withdrew. As Lucinda turned toward the doors, the cuff of her grey riding habit caught the afternoon light. A narrow trim of scarlet and silver flashed against the fabric. Philip saw it. His entire body stiffened. Harriet followed his gaze. So did Everard. Lucinda reached the doors without looking back. Only when they closed did Philip whisper, "Please don't make me tell all of it now." Harriet answered before the Duke could. "You do not have to tell all of it now." Everard stood very still. "But you will tell enough to keep yourself safe." Philip looked at him. "Will she go away?" "I do not know who you mean yet." "Miss Rivington." Harriet felt the words like a hand closing around her heart. Philip continued, "Will she go away if I tell?" Everard's expression changed. For the first time, the powerful man before them looked less like a duke and more like a father who had just discovered that his son had been carrying fear alone. "No one will be dismissed for telling me the truth." Philip looked at Harriet as though seeking confirmation. She could not promise what she did not control. "You heard his grace." Slowly, Philip nodded. Harriet looked down at the wooden soldier. "May I open it now?" The boy swallowed. "Yes." She pressed lightly against the base. A small wooden panel shifted. Something bright appeared inside the hollow compartment. Harriet tipped the soldier carefully over her palm. A narrow strip of scarlet ribbon edged in silver began to slide out. Everard went completely still. Philip whispered, "I hid it before she came out." For 3 full seconds, no one moved. The strip of scarlet and silver ribbon lay across Harriet's palm, like something far too small to frighten a child. Yet Philip stared at it as though the gallery floor had opened beneath him. Everard's gaze moved from the ribbon to his son's face. "Do not touch anything else." His voice was calm, but the command carried enough force to make Harriet still her hand at once. Philip looked up sharply. "Am I in trouble?" The question struck the room harder than any accusation could have done. Everard crossed the remaining distance between them and lowered himself until he was nearer his son's height. "No." Philip's fingers twisted together. "Even if I took it, even then." The Duke glanced at Harriet. "We will continue this somewhere quieter." Harriet closed the hollow base of the wooden soldier without forcing it and handed the toy back to Philip. He gripped it instantly. Everard called for a footman and gave precise instructions. Mrs. Bell, the housekeeper, was to come to the schoolroom. Mrs. Archer, Philip's nurse, was to remain with the boy. No one else was to enter without permission. Lucinda and Algernon were not to be informed of anything beyond the fact that Philip was unwell after the interrupted sitting. Harriet noticed that last order. So did Philip. As they crossed the gallery, the boy reached for her hand. He did not ask. He simply slipped his small fingers into hers, as though the decision had already been made. Harriet felt Everard see it. She did not know whether that mattered yet. The schoolroom stood 2 floors above the west terrace, far from the formal rooms and their listening doors. Maps lined one wall. Copybooks lay neatly stacked beside a globe. Mrs. Archer arrived first, breathing quickly from the stairs, followed by Mrs. Bell, whose grey hair and steady expression had governed Marden Park for nearly 20 years. Everard closed the door. "No one interrupts us." Mrs. Bell nodded. Harriet placed the ribbon on a folded square of white linen. Against the pale cloth, the scarlet looked darker. One edge was woven with a narrow silver border. One end had been torn roughly. The other bore a greasy stain. Harriet did not touch it again. "Philip," she said, "may I ask you something?" He stood beside Mrs. Archer, but looked only at Harriet. "Yes. Did someone put that ribbon inside your soldier?" He shook his head. "I did." "Why?" His eyes dropped to the floor, so she couldn't take it back. Harriet kept her tone quiet. "You said you hid it before she came out. Where were you?" Philip looked at the wooden soldier in his hands. Near the south passage, Everard became still. Harriet knew the old service passage beyond the south stables. It was rarely used now. "What were you doing there?" "I lost the cavalryman." "One of your other soldiers?" He nodded. "I thought I dropped him." Harriet waited. Philip took a breath. The door was open. "I heard people talking." Everard spoke for the first time. "How many people?" Philip's shoulders tightened. Harriet looked at the Duke. He stopped himself. It was a small thing, but she noticed. "You do not have to answer everything at once," she told the boy. "Tell me only what you remember clearly." Philip nodded. "2 voices, maybe 3. I don't know." "Did you recognize them?" He hesitated. "1." Harriet felt Everard's attention sharpen. "You do not have to name anyone yet." Relief passed across Philip's face. "I saw the ribbon on the floor. It was near the door. I picked it up. And then I heard footsteps." His hand closed around the toy soldier, so I opened the bottom and pushed the ribbon inside. Harriet glanced at Everard. The critical detail was now clear. Whoever came out had not seen Philip take the ribbon. "Then she came out?" Harriet asked. Philip nodded. "Lady Lucinda," Mrs. Archer inhaled softly. Everard did not move. Harriet kept her voice even. "Did she see what you had hidden?" "No." "Did she ask what you were holding?" "No." "The soldier was in my hand." "What did she say?" Philip swallowed. "She said I shouldn't listen where I wasn't wanted." Everard's jaw tightened. "Anything else?" Philip looked at Harriet. She nodded once. He continued. "She said boys who want to be dukes shouldn't need governesses following them everywhere." Harriet felt Mrs. Bell look at her. She ignored it. "And after that?" Philip's breathing became shallow again. Harriet did not rush him. "She said after the portrait I had to ride alone." The silence that followed was immediate. Everard straightened. "What ride?" Philip looked confused. "The one tomorrow." Mrs. Bell's face changed. Harriet turned to her. "There is a ride scheduled?" "Yes," the housekeeper answered carefully. "A morning ride through South Wood. The stable staff were informed 3 days ago." Everard's voice turned cold. "By whom?" Mrs. Bell hesitated. "I cannot say with certainty, Your Grace. I understood it had been arranged through the family party." Harriet looked back at Philip. "Did Lady Lucinda say anything about the portrait?" He nodded. "She said once people saw me standing beside Father, everyone would know I was fine." Everard's expression darkened, and then she said there'd be no reason for anyone to fuss over me. Harriet felt the pieces move closer together, though they did not yet form proof. Public portrait, healthy heir, ride after the sitting. A frightened child warned not to speak. "Philip," she said, "did Lady Lucinda threaten you?" He looked at her for a long moment. "She said if I told stories, you'd be sent away." The words made Mrs. Archer look down. Harriet felt something cold settle beneath her ribs. "Did she say that exactly?" "She said frightened boys make trouble for people who encourage them. She said Father would understand eventually, and you'd have to leave." Philip's eyes filled, but he did not cry. "I didn't want you to go." Harriet wanted to reach for him. She did not. "Instead," she said, "you did not cause any of this." He looked at her. "But I took the ribbon. That does not make the threat your fault." Everard moved closer. "And no one will send Miss Rivington away because you told the truth." Philip studied his father. "Even if she says I lied?" The question changed Everard's face. He answered slowly, "You will be heard, and I will find out what happened." Philip looked down at his soldier. "You believe me?" Everard paused. Harriet understood the danger of the answer. Blind belief could be as careless as dismissal. The Duke seemed to understand it too. "I believe you are afraid. I believe you heard something. I believe the ribbon was hidden inside that soldier before Lucinda came out. And I promise I will not ignore any of it. Philip nodded. That was enough for now. Mrs. Archer led him to the window seat with a cup of warm milk, while Harriet and Everard turned toward the ribbon. Mrs. Bell remained close. Harriet bent slightly, but did not touch it. There is residue on one end. Everard leaned nearer. Leather dressing. Harriet looked at him. You are certain? Not entirely. But I know the smell. Mrs. Bell frowned. The head groom uses a dark mixture on older tack. Everard's eyes moved to the stained end. Neatsfoot oil, beeswax, and lampblack. Harriet looked from the ribbon to him. Then it may have come from the stables. May have. His gaze sharpened. Not did. Harriet met his eyes. A clue is not proof. Something in his expression shifted. You choose your words carefully. A woman in my position survives by doing so. The answer left a brief silence between them. Everard looked toward Philip, then back to Harriet. You risked that position by bringing this to me. His safety was worth more. For one moment the Duke said nothing. Then he turned to Mrs. Bell. Cancel tomorrow's ride. Quietly. No horse is to be saddled for Philip. No outing is to be arranged without my direct order. Mrs. Bell inclined her head. Yes, Your Grace. And send for Mr. Carden. He is to inspect every piece of equipment associated with my son before sunset. Harriet looked at the ribbon again. The silver edging caught the afternoon light. Everard followed her gaze. I have seen that pattern before. Harriet did not answer. She already knew where. On my cousin's riding clothes, he said. Across the room, Philip suddenly looked up. His face lost color. Everard saw it. Then the boy whispered, She didn't know I took it. But she knew I heard them. Harriet turned toward him. Heard what? Philip's fingers closed around the toy soldier. I don't know all of it. He looked at his father. Only that, after the picture, I was supposed to ride alone. Everard did not answer immediately. His gaze remained on Philip, but something in his expression had changed. The fear was no longer abstract. It had a sequence now. A portrait meant to prove the heir was healthy. A ride arranged for the following morning. A ribbon hidden before Lucinda emerged from the south passage. A child warned that his governess would be sent away if he spoke. Harriet saw the moment the Duke stopped treating the pieces as separate. Mrs. Archer, he said, stay with Philip. Then he looked at Harriet. You will come with me. She did not ask where. She knew. The study was silent when they entered, except for the faint ticking of the clock above the mantel. Everard closed the door and placed the folded linen with the ribbon on his desk. He did not sit. Harriet remained opposite him. For several seconds, he studied the dark stain at one end. The head groom uses this mixture, he said. Mr. Carden prepares it himself. Neatsfoot oil, beeswax, and lampblack. It is used on older leather in the south stables. Harriet looked at the ribbon. Then the residue is consistent. Yes, but not conclusive. His eyes lifted to hers. You are determined not to overstate anything. Because if we accuse the wrong person, the right one gains time. The answer seemed to satisfy him, and if Lucinda is involved, then she must be proved involved. Everard's jaw tightened. You are cautious even after my son named her. He named her as the person who threatened him. He did not say she cut leather or planned the ride. You believe there is more than one person. Philip heard more than one voice. Everard looked toward the study windows. Algernon was at Marden Park 3 days before the portrait. Harriet waited. He pressed for the sitting to proceed. Everard continued. He said the county had heard too much about Philip's grief. He wanted the portrait completed before tomorrow's ride. Harriet felt the significance settle between them. Why? That is the question. A knock sounded, Mr. Carden entered first, broad-shouldered and grey-haired, with Mr. Bell, the estate steward, behind him. Everard did not explain everything. He showed the ribbon and asked Mr. Carden to examine the stain. The groom leaned closer, then inhaled carefully. "My dressing mixture, Your Grace, or something very like it. Where is it kept? In the south tack room. Who has access?" Mr. Carden hesitated. "Stable staff, senior household servants, family, if they choose to enter. The door is not ordinarily locked during the day." Everard's expression hardened. "It will be now." He gave the orders quickly. Philip's saddle, bridle, girths, reins, traces, and every piece of equipment associated with his rides were to be inspected. No one was to remove anything from the south stables. Mr. Bell was to make a list of everyone who had entered the area within the past week. "And the ride tomorrow?" Mr. Carden asked, condoled. "Because of the ribbon?" "Because my son is not riding anywhere until I know why someone told him he must ride alone after the portrait." Mr. Carden's face changed. Mr. Bell glanced toward Harriet, then away. Everard noticed. "Miss Rivington is here because Philip gave his account to her. You will treat her presence accordingly." The order was not loud, but it made the hierarchy clear. Harriet felt the weight of it. So did the two men. Mr. Carden bowed. "Of course, Your Grace." Less than half an hour later, Harriet crossed the stable yard beside Everard. The afternoon air carried the smell of hay, leather, and damp earth. Grooms moved quietly under Mr. Carden's direction. No one knew the whole reason for the inspection, but everyone sensed urgency. The south tack room stood cool and orderly. Saddles lined one wall, bridles hung from polished hooks. Philip's riding equipment had been placed separately on a long bench. Mr. Carden began with the saddle. He checked stitching, buckles, straps, girths, then the bridle. Nothing. Everard's impatience showed only in the stillness of his hands. Harriet watched without speaking. Mr. Carden moved to a set of traces used with the small pony carriage that sometimes accompanied Philip's riding lessons. He lifted one strap, bent it toward the light, then stopped. "Your Grace." Everard stepped closer. "What is it?" The groom turned the leather over. On the underside, hidden where a casual glance would never find it, ran a narrow cut. It was not deep enough to sever the strap while still. It was deep enough to weaken it. Mr. Carden pressed it with his thumb. This was done by hand. Harriet felt a chill move through her. Could it have happened by wear? "No, miss." Mr. Carden's voice was firm. "Wear phrase. It does not slice cleanly from the underside." Everard's face went white with control. Would it have failed? Under enough strain, yes. No one spoke. The tack room seemed suddenly smaller. Harriet looked at the leather, then at the ribbon on the folded cloth Everard still carried. Philip was right. Everard turned toward her. She corrected herself. He was right to be afraid. The Duke looked back at the damaged trace. "Seal this room. No one enters without my permission." "Mr. Carden, inspect everything again." "Mr. Bell, I want names, times, and every order concerning Philip's ride." "Yes, Your Grace." Everard's gaze sharpened. "And find out who first suggested that ride." Mr. Bell bowed and left at once. Harriet remained while Mr. Carden wrapped the damaged trace in cloth. She noticed Everard looking at the cut as though he could force it to confess. "Your Grace?" He did not answer. "You acted in time." His eyes moved to hers. "Because you brought me a ribbon." "Because Philip trusted enough to show it. He trusted you." Harriet heard the distinction. He trusted someone who asked before touching his soldier. You make it sound simple. Often the difficult part is choosing not to make it complicated. A faint breath left him. Not quite laughter, not quite relief. Then his expression closed again. Come. They returned to the house by the west entrance. Lucinda and Algernon were waiting in the morning room, as though they had expected to be summoned. Lucinda sat beside the fire in grey silk trimmed with scarlet and silver. Algernon stood behind her chair. At last, Lucinda said, "May we now know why the household has been turned upside down?" Everard remained standing. Harriet stopped several feet behind him. A leather trace associated with Philip's riding equipment was deliberately cut. Lucinda's face did not move. Algernon's did, only slightly. "That is a serious accusation," he said. "It is a fact." Everard's voice was cold. "The question is who did it?" Lucinda looked toward Harriet. "And I suppose the governess has an answer." Harriet said nothing. Everard did. "Miss Rivington brought me evidence." "She did not make an accusation." Lucinda's mouth tightened. "The ribbon." Harriet saw it then. One section of the trim on Lucinda's cuff was turned inward, hidden beneath the sleeve. Not proof. Not enough. But Everard followed Harriet's gaze. So did Algernon. Lucinda lowered her arm. "A ribbon can be stolen, Everard." Perhaps the Duke's eyes remained on her, but cut leather cannot explain itself away. Algernon stepped forward. "Then let us be careful. A damaged trace, a frightened child, and a piece of trim do not make a conspiracy." "No," Harriet said. 3 faces turned toward her. She continued, "But timing matters." Algernon's expression sharpened. "What timing?" Harriet looked at Everard. The Duke did not stop her. The portrait was meant to show the county that Philip was healthy, calm, and no longer ruled by grief. Tomorrow, he was meant to ride alone. Lucinda's fingers tightened against her skirt. Harriet continued. Someone wanted public proof that nothing was wrong before something went wrong. Silence followed. Everard turned to Algernon. "You pressed hardest for the portrait to be completed." Algernon gave a short laugh. "Because the boy cannot hide forever. And the ride? I had nothing to do with arranging it." Everard studied him. "You are certain?" "Entirely." At that moment, Mr. Bell appeared in the doorway, pale and breathless. "Your Grace." Everard turned. "What is it?" The steward held a folded household memorandum. The instruction for Master Philip's ride was entered 3 days ago. "By whom?" Mr. Bell looked from Everard to Algernon. The stable office recorded that the arrangement came through Lord Algernon's request. No one moved. Algernon's face changed. "That is impossible." Everard's voice became very quiet. "Then someone has lied in my house." Harriet looked at the damaged cuff, the silent brother, and the woman who had threatened a child into silence. For the first time, the portrait no longer seemed like the beginning of the mystery. It seemed like part of the plan. Lucinda recovered first, then the stable office is mistaken. Her voice was cool, almost bored, but Harriet saw the stiffness in her shoulders. Algernon turned toward Mr. Bell. "Who made the entry?" "The assistant clerk, my lord, and he claims I gave the order. He recorded that the request came through your name." Algernon gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "Then someone used it." Everard did not look away from him. "Who? How should I know?" "You seemed certain a moment ago that you had nothing to do with the ride." "I am." "Then someone arranged it, while making certain the stable office believed you had." Algernon's expression hardened, or the clerk misunderstood. Lucinda rose. "This is exactly why frightened children and scraps of ribbon should not be allowed to govern a household. Every ordinary error now becomes evidence." Harriet watched Everard. He stood very still, but she had begun to understand that his stillness was not hesitation. It was restraint under pressure. "A trace was cut," he said. "That was not an ordinary error." Lucinda's gaze moved to Harriet. And who benefits most from turning Philip's fear into a crisis? The words landed softly, which made them more dangerous. Miss Rivington is suddenly the only person he trusts. The only person who understands him. The only person whose advice may not be questioned without appearing cruel. Harriet felt every familiar warning in the accusation. Ambition, impropriety, a governess forgetting her place, she answered carefully. Master Philip's fear existed before I asked him about it, but you gave it importance. It became important when someone cut his equipment. Lucinda's mouth tightened, or when someone wanted the Duke to believe that danger surrounded his son. Everard turned toward her. Enough. Is it? Lucinda asked. You are restricting family, sealing rooms, questioning servants, and allowing a governess to stand beside you as though she were part of the investigation. Harriet felt the insult. Everard heard it too. She is part of the investigation because Philip spoke to her. Then perhaps you should ask why. The room went silent. Harriet knew what Lucinda meant. So did everyone else. A lonely child, a widowed duke, an unmarried governess in her 30s. Society needed very little evidence to invent appetite where there was only duty. Everard's voice became cold. You will not speak of Miss Rivington that way in my house. Lucinda held his gaze. Then ask her plainly. Harriet looked at Everard before he could respond. You should. Lucinda blinked. Even Algernon seemed surprised. Harriet continued. If I am to be suspected, I would rather be questioned directly than discussed in corners. Everard studied her. Very well. He turned to Mr. Bell. The stable entry is to be preserved. No corrections. No one is to question the clerk until I do. Then he looked at Lucinda and Algernon. Neither of you will be alone with Philip until I know more. Algernon's face changed. You cannot be serious. I am, against your own family, especially when the danger may have come from within it. Lucinda went pale. You disgrace us on the word of a child. No, I restrict access because someone deliberately cut equipment associated with my son. And the governess? She remains. That one word altered the room. Harriet did not mistake it for trust without limit, but neither did Lucinda. Everard dismissed them. Algernon left first. Lucinda paused at the door and looked directly at Harriet. A woman should be careful when she becomes necessary too quickly. Harriet met her gaze. A child should not have to be afraid because adults find his fear inconvenient. Lucinda's expression sharpened, then she left. Mr. Bell followed soon after. Everard waited until the door closed. You asked to be questioned. Yes. Then I will not insult you by pretending there are no reasons for it. Harriet stood opposite him. Good. He moved to the fireplace but did not sit. Did you place the ribbon inside Philip's soldier? No. Did you damage the trace? No. Did you tell him what to say about Lucinda? No. Did you know tomorrow's ride had been scheduled before Philip mentioned it? No. Everard watched her face. Have you ever entered the South Tack Room? Once, 6 months ago, when Philip left a copybook in the carriage after a lesson. Were you alone? For perhaps 2 minutes. Do you know where Mr. Carden keeps the dressing mixture? No. He was silent. Harriet said, Ask the question you have not asked. His brow tightened. Which one? Whether I want Philip to depend on me. Everard's expression shifted. Do you? No child should depend on one person alone for safety. The answer surprised him. Yet he trusts you. That is not the same thing. Explain. Harriet folded her hands more tightly. Trust becomes dangerous when adults compete to own it. Philip needs several people he can speak to without fear. Mrs. Archer, Mrs. Bell, you. Everard looked away for a moment. The omission hurt more because she had not meant it cruelly. "And you?" he asked. "If he chooses?" Silence passed between them. Everard's voice lowered. "You think I have failed him?" Harriet considered lying. "It would have been safer. I think grief made you mistake quietness for recovery." His face hardened, but he did not dismiss her. "That is not the same as failure." "No. You are careful again. I am truthful again." The tension between them held. Then Everard said, "If I question everyone, I must question you. I know. And if I do not, I am not protecting my son. I am only choosing whom I prefer to believe." Harriet nodded. "Then question me. But do not ask Philip the same thing again and again until fear teaches him which answer ends the questions." Everard's eyes narrowed. "You believe I would do that?" "I believe frightened adults often do things in panic that they would condemn in calmer moments." "Have you seen it?" Harriet looked toward the darkening windows. "Yes." He waited, but she offered nothing more. To his credit, he did not press. A knock came at the door. Mrs. Archer entered, pale with concern. "Your Grace, Master Philip fell asleep, but he woke badly. He keeps calling for Miss Rivington." Harriet was already moving. Everard followed. The nursery corridor was dim with evening lamps. Philip's room stood at the far end, the door open. Inside, the boy twisted beneath the covers, half awake and breathing too quickly. "No," he whispered. "Don't send her away." Harriet crossed to the bed, but did not touch him until his eyes opened. "I am here." Philip stared at her. "Did I do wrong?" "No. Are you going?" "Not tonight." He looked toward Everard, who stood several feet away. Harriet saw the question in the boy's face before he asked it. "Can I keep my soldiers?" "Of course," she said. Philip pushed himself upright. Mrs. Archer brought the wooden figures from the nearby table. He began placing them on the carpet beside the bed, not randomly. Harriet watched. One cavalryman near the door, one drummer beside the chair, 3 infantrymen forming a crooked line toward the fireplace. One soldier stood alone near the east wall. Another officer stood apart from all the rest, close to the edge of the rug. Harriet lowered herself to the floor. "May I watch?" Philip nodded. "Do the soldiers mean places?" He touched the cavalryman. "The picture room, then the drummer. The south passage." Harriet's pulse quickened. She pointed toward the infantryman near the east wall. "And that one?" Philip looked at it, then away. "Not yet." Everard moved closer. "Philip!" The boy stiffened. Everard stopped. Harriet saw him make the choice. He did not ask again. Philip's breathing eased. After a moment, he touched the solitary officer with one finger. "Some soldiers are places." His voice was barely audible. "Some are people." Harriet looked at the figure near the east wall, then at the officer standing apart. "And this one?" Philip's hand trembled. "That is where they said it would look like no one's fault." The room went completely still. Everard did not move. Harriet felt the mystery shift beneath them. The cut trace was no longer the only plan. There was another place, another meaning, and one soldier on the carpet represented someone Philip was still too afraid to name. By 7 the next morning, Harriet had learned 2 things. The first was that Philip had slept without another nightmare after she remained near him until almost midnight. The second was that the missing cavalryman had not vanished by accident. She stood in the nursery with Everard while grey morning light touched the carpet where Philip's soldiers still formed their strange map. Mrs. Archer had been instructed not to disturb them. The cavalryman near the door marked the great gallery. The drummer beside the chair marked the south passage. 3 infantrymen formed the crooked route Philip had taken. One soldier stood near the east wall, still unexplained. The solitary officer remained apart from all the others. Harriet looked at the empty space where another cavalryman should have been. He said he had it after hearing the voices. Everard stood beside the fireplace, his coat already buttoned for the morning, and he placed it here so he would not forget. Yes, Harriet studied the pattern. If he carried it through the south passage, he may have dropped it there. Everard's gaze sharpened, or someone moved it. Possibly. He crossed toward the rug and stopped before touching anything. Harriet noticed. Yesterday, he might have picked up the soldiers without thinking. Today, he waited. There is an old service corridor. Behind the tack room, he said, little used since the east stables were renovated. Would Philip know it? Philip knows half this estate better than I do. The admission held no pride, only regret. Harriet looked toward the closed nursery door. Then we search without questioning him again. Everard nodded, agreed. Philip remained upstairs with Mrs. Archer and Mrs. Bell, while Harriet accompanied Everard to the south passage. Mr. Carden and Mr. Bell were already waiting, along with a thin stable lad of perhaps 13 named Owen Pike. The boy held a brush in one hand and stared at the floor, as though hoping no one would notice him. The passage was narrow and cold, lined with old hooks, empty trunks, broken saddle stands, and dust that had settled in the corners. A strip of pale mud crossed the floor from the outer stable door. Harriet crouched slightly to look without touching. Someone tracked this in. Mr. Carden nodded. From the south yard. Recently, within a day or two, the weather has been dry enough that older marks would have hardened. Owen shifted his weight. Mr. Bell heard it. Do you know something? The boy looked up too quickly. No, sir. Mr. Bell's face tightened. Do not lie to me. Harriet turned. Owen had gone pale. Mr. Bell. The steward looked at her. This is a household matter. So is frightened silence. He drew himself up. The boy is a servant. He is also afraid. Everard said nothing, but Harriet felt his attention on her. Mr. Bell frowned. You are not in a position to promise him immunity from consequences. No. Harriet looked at Everard, but his grace is. The Duke stepped forward. Owen. The boy swallowed. Yes, your grace. No servant in this house will be punished for truthful testimony concerning my son. Tell us only what you saw or heard. Do not guess. Do not add what you think we wish to know. Owen looked at Harriet. She nodded once. His shoulders lowered by a fraction. I saw Master Philip running through here. When? Everard asked. Owen glanced at Harriet before answering. Late afternoon, the day before the portrait, your grace. Was he alone? When I saw him, yes. Was he carrying anything? Owen hesitated. One of his wooden soldiers. A horseman. Harriet felt the clue tighten. A cavalryman? Yes, miss. Mr. Bell stepped closer. Why did you say nothing yesterday? Owen's face changed. Harriet saw fear return. Because someone else was there. Who? Mr. Bell demanded. Harriet spoke before the boy could retreat. Tell us only what you know. Owen looked toward the far end of the passage. After Master Philip ran past, I heard someone coming. I hid behind the old harness chest. Why? Harriet asked. I thought I'd be blamed for being where I shouldn't. And what did you see? A lady's skirt. Mr. Bell's voice sharpened. Which lady? Owen flinched. Harriet turned to the steward. Fear does not become truth merely because a more powerful man raises his voice. The words struck the passage into silence. Mr. Bell reddened. Everard looked at Harriet with a steadier respect than before. Owen took a breath. I didn't see her face, only the lower part of her skirt. Dark red. She went toward the stable yard. Harriet said, Then we cannot say who she was. No, miss. Did you hear anything? The boy nodded. A man's voice. Everard became very still. Did you recognize it? Owen looked down. I think so. Thinking is not enough, Harriet said gently. Was it familiar to you? Yes, whose voice? Owen swallowed. Lord Algernon's. The silence that followed was heavier than the one before it. Everard's face did not change, but Harriet saw the effort required. What did he say? I couldn't hear everything. Only what you heard clearly, Harriet reminded him. Owen nodded. He said the boy must not be allowed to spoil the plan. Mr. Bell inhaled sharply. Mr. Carden looked toward Everard. The Duke said nothing for several seconds. Then, from farther down the passage, came the scrape of wood against stone. Mr. Carden had moved an old saddle chest away from the wall. Your Grace. Harriet and Everard crossed toward him. Behind the chest, half covered in dust, lay a small wooden cavalryman. One black-painted boot was smeared with pale, dried mud. Harriet and Everard reached for it at the same moment. Their hands stopped less than an inch apart. Neither touched the other. For one suspended second, Harriet became aware of the warmth of his hand, the controlled stillness in him, and the fact that he had drawn back first. You found it, he said. Harriet picked up the soldier carefully. The mud on its boot matched the chalky soil tracked from the south stable yard. Philip carried this when Owen saw him. Mr. Carden nodded. Looks that way. Everard turned toward Owen. You have done well. The boy looked startled. I won't be dismissed. No. Even because I waited, Everard's voice softened. You were afraid. Harriet watched the Duke say it as though he were learning the phrase for himself. Owen nodded and looked down. Mr. Bell cleared his throat. Your Grace, there is another matter. Everard faced him. What? The groom assigned unexpectedly near the East Coach House 3 days ago. Thomas Hale. Harriet looked up. The East Wall soldier. What about him? He has not reported for morning duty. Mr. Carden frowned. That is unlike him, Mr. Bell continued. His wife lives in one of the estate cottages. She came to the servants' entrance before dawn, asking whether anyone had seen him. She said he has been restless for several days and returned home twice with money he would not explain. Everard's gaze moved to Harriet. The East Coach House. She nodded slowly. Philip placed one infantryman near the east wall. Mr. Bell looked between them. You think the boy marked another location? I think we should not assume anything yet, Harriet said, but we should not ignore it. Everard turned to Mr. Carden. Find Hale quietly. Do not frighten his wife, and no one enters the East Coach House without my permission. Yes, Your Grace. Owen was dismissed with instructions to speak to no one about what he had said. When the others moved ahead, Everard remained beside Harriet. In the passage. The cavalryman rested in her palm. You knew he would speak to you. No, you knew how to make it possible. Harriet looked toward the place where Owen had hidden. There is a difference. Everard was silent. Then he asked, Who listened when you were afraid? The question was so unexpected that Harriet looked at him. His expression held no curiosity for gossip, only attention. She could have answered lightly. Instead, she said, Not everyone is fortunate enough to be believed the first time. Everard's eyes stayed on her face. And were you? Harriet closed her fingers gently around the wooden soldier. That is a question for another day. To his credit, he did not press. Footsteps approached quickly. Mr. Carden returned, his face grim. Your Grace. Everard turned. What is it? Hale's wife says he was paid by someone in the family party. She doesn't know who, only that he was frightened after taking the money. Harriet felt the corridor narrow around them. Everard's voice became quiet. And where is he now? Mr. Carden shook his head. No one knows. Harriet looked at the cavalryman in her hand, then toward the direction of the East Coach House. One soldier had been found, one groom had disappeared, and Philip's map still contained a place no adult had yet understood. By the time the dinner bell sounded that evening, Marden Park had acquired the peculiar silence of a great house, trying to pretend nothing was wrong. Servants moved efficiently. Silver shone, lamps burned. Carriages arrived one after another beneath the porte cochere, carrying county families who had been invited weeks earlier, and saw no reason to suspect that a groom had disappeared, a child's riding equipment had been cut, and the heir to Alverton had spent the previous night arranging wooden soldiers into a map of danger. Everard had considered cancelling the dinner. Harriet knew this because he had said so plainly in the library that afternoon. Then Mr. Bell had reminded him that a sudden cancellation after the interrupted portrait sitting would feed precisely the gossip Lucinda had claimed to fear. Everard had gone still, then said, "Very well, the dinner proceeds." But Philip remains upstairs. Harriet had expected to remain there with him. Instead, shortly before the guests entered the drawing-room, a footman brought word that the Duke wished to speak with her downstairs. When Harriet entered, she felt the room notice her. Not openly. Society preferred its cruelty polished. A glance held a second too long. A conversation paused. A woman in plum silk looked toward Harriet's plain brown gown and then toward Everard, as though comparing two things that should never have belonged in the same room. Lucinda stood near the fireplace in pale grey, without the scarlet and silver riding trim she had worn earlier. Algernon spoke with a baronet and his wife, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair. He looked composed. If Owen's testimony troubled him, he concealed it well. Everard crossed toward Harriet before anyone else could. "You came. You asked me too, Your Grace." "I did." His gaze rested briefly on her face. Not long enough to be improper, long enough for her to know he was making certain. She remained steady after the morning in the South Passage. Lucinda approached with a faint smile. "How unusual." Harriet turned. "My lady?" A governess in the drawing-room before dinner. Her tone suggested curiosity, nothing more. One almost wonders what position you are expected to occupy next. Several nearby guests heard. Harriet knew because silence gathered around the sentence. Algernon joined them with effortless ease. "Come, Lucinda. Miss Rivington has had an eventful week." Indeed, Lucinda looked at Harriet. One might say she has become indispensable. Harriet felt the trap. To defend herself too quickly would look guilty. To remain silent would allow the suggestion to grow. She answered calmly. "Children sometimes require attention more than households require appearances." Lucinda's smile cooled. Algernon lifted his glass. A governess ought to teach Latin, not succession. The baronet's wife looked down. Someone farther away coughed softly. Harriet met Algernon's gaze. "Attention to a child is not ambition, my lord." "No?" His tone remained light. "Then perhaps you do not understand how much influence can follow from being the only person a future duke chooses to trust. Trust is not a title. No, sometimes it is more useful." Everard spoke before Harriet could answer. "Miss Rivington acted correctly." The room quieted. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "She brought me information concerning my son. Because of that information, dangerous damage was discovered in the stables before any harm occurred." A murmur moved through the guests. Lucinda's face changed by a fraction. Everard continued. "She retains my full confidence." Harriet felt every eye turn toward her. Public defense should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt strangely exposing. Yet she held her head steady. She would not make herself smaller to comfort people who preferred governesses invisible. Algernon smiled, though less easily than before. Of course, we are all relieved Philip is safe. Harriet looked at him. Are we? The words left more quietly than she intended. Algernon's eyes sharpened. Everard noticed. Lucinda stepped between them with practiced grace. Shall we go in? The soup will be ruined before the family reputation is. The dinner proceeded beneath chandeliers and painted ceilings. Harriet did not join the table. She had no right to, and no wish to manufacture one. But before withdrawing, she remained near the drawing-room doors while guests arranged themselves. That was when she heard Algernon speaking to Sir Matthew Crane about horses. The bay pony never even left the south yard, he said with a laugh. Harriet stopped. The sentence itself was ordinary. The knowledge was not. Only a small number of people knew which pony Philip had been scheduled to ride and where it had been prepared. Mr. Carden had spoken of the bay gelding privately that morning. Mr. Bell had restricted stable information after the cut trace was discovered. Harriet looked toward Everard. He had heard it too. His gaze met hers across the room. Neither moved immediately. Then Everard crossed to Algernon. Which bay pony? Algernon turned. I beg your pardon? You said the bay pony never left the south yard. Algernon's smile held. Did I? You did. Then I must have heard it from Lucinda. Lucinda, 3 steps away, looked at him. The pause lasted only a heartbeat. I said no such thing. The room did not go silent this time because the guests had already begun moving toward dinner. But Harriet saw the fracture. Small, real. Algernon recovered. Then perhaps from a groom. Must every casual sentence now be examined as evidence? Everard's expression remained unreadable, only the ones containing restricted information. Algernon's jaw tightened. Your household is becoming very theatrical. Harriet thought of Philip's words. Not after the picture. The problem was not that the household had become theatrical. It was that someone had been trying to stage normality before danger. Everard did not answer. He simply watched Algernon until the other man looked away. Later, after the final carriage disappeared down the drive, Harriet was summoned to the Duke's study. Mr. Bell was already there, with several papers on the desk. Everard stood near the fire. His coat was unbuttoned at the throat, and fatigue showed plainly now. What has happened? Harriet asked. Mr. Bell answered. His Grace instructed me to review recent correspondence concerning Lord Algernon's finances. He opened a ledger. There have been demands from creditors for nearly 4 years, some known, some concealed through private notes. Harriet looked at Everard. How serious? Serious enough, he said, that 2 lenders are prepared to act within a fortnight. Against what property? What remains of his estate? Mr. Bell slid another paper forward. Much of it is already heavily encumbered. Harriet looked down at the figures. She did not need to understand every legal detail to understand desperation. And Lucinda? Mr. Bell hesitated. Everard answered. Her income depends partly on Algernon's solvency. Their father, the late Marquess of Wexford, left obligations that were never fully settled. Algernon's collapse would leave her with very little independent security. Harriet absorbed that. For the first time, Lucinda's cruelty acquired a harder shape. Not excuse. Motive. So both of them stand to lose nearly everything. Yes, and Philip? Everard's face closed. Mr. Bell spoke carefully. Under the Alverton patent, if Master Philip were to die without issue, and his Grace left no further son, Lord Algernon would stand next in the male line. The room seemed to contract. Harriet looked at Everard. Then Philip is the life standing between Algernon and becoming heir presumptive. Yes, Everard's voice was low, though not between him and immediate inheritance. I am still alive. Harriet held his gaze. Desperate men sometimes plan beyond the present. He did not disagree. Mr. Bell added, there is more. Lord Algernon sought private credit 6 months ago against expectations of future family advancement. Everard's mouth hardened. He borrowed against a future he did not yet possess. Harriet looked toward the fire. Then we have motive, not proof. Everard nodded. Exactly. He came closer to the desk. But Algernon knew which pony Philip was meant to ride. He denied arranging the outing. The stable record says otherwise. Owen heard his voice near the passage, and now we know his debts are closing in. Harriet looked at the papers again. Why now? Because creditors act within 2 weeks. And the portrait? Everard's gaze sharpened. Because once the county saw Philip standing healthy beside me, any later accident would look less like fear ignored and more like misfortune. The words settled heavily between them. Harriet felt cold despite the fire. At last, the timing made sense. The portrait was not decoration. It was cover, a public performance of safety before a private danger. A knock sounded. A footman entered, carrying a sealed envelope on a tray. This was left at the servants' entrance, Your Grace. No name was given. Everard took it, broke the plain seal, and read. His face became unreadable. He handed the page to Harriet. One sentence had been written in a disguised hand. Miss Rivington has taught the boy to fear, so the Duke will believe his son cannot be safe without her. Harriet read it twice. Then she looked up. Everard was already watching her. Somewhere inside Marden Park, someone had understood that evidence alone might not be enough to stop Harriet. So they had decided to make her the danger instead. The anonymous note did not remain private for long. By the following afternoon, Marden Park had begun to hum with the kind of restrained unease that great houses call discretion and servants recognized as fear. No one openly accused Harriet. That would have been too direct. Instead, conversations ended when she entered. A maid carrying folded linen lowered her eyes. 2 visiting ladies, who had remained after the previous evening's dinner, glanced toward Harriet and then toward each other. She understood the language. She had lived among households long enough to know that scandal rarely needed proof once class had chosen its preferred target. The small reception in the great gallery had been arranged weeks earlier so selected guests could view the preliminary portrait sketches. Cancelling it now would create more questions, and Lucinda had argued that the family had already indulged fear enough. Everard had allowed the gathering to proceed. But Philip remained upstairs with Mrs. Archer. Harriet had expected to stay with him. Instead, the painter requested clarification about Philip's posture and the arrangement of the figures, and Everard asked Harriet to attend briefly. She entered the gallery, knowing she was stepping back into the room where everything had begun. The unfinished family composition stood beneath a cloth. Smaller sketches rested on easels. Afternoon light fell across the polished floor. Lucinda wore grey silk. Algernon stood near the fireplace. Everard crossed toward Harriet as soon as she appeared. You came. You asked me to, Your Grace. Yes. His gaze held hers for a moment. There was concern there, also something more difficult to name. Before either could speak further, a maid's frightened voice broke across the gallery. My lady. Everyone turned. The maid stood near one of the side tables, holding a strip of scarlet and silver ribbon. Lucinda moved toward her. What is it? The maid looked near tears. "I found this in Miss Rivington's trunk." The room changed. Harriet felt it before anyone spoke. Every guest became still. Algernon lowered his glass. Everard's face gave nothing away. Harriet stared at the ribbon. It was clean, no dark tack residue, no rough stain, just scarlet center, silver edge, and a freshly cut end. "Where exactly did you find it?" Harriet asked. The maid swallowed. "Under your folded linen, miss." Lucinda turned slowly. "How extraordinary." Harriet looked at her. "Who sent her into my room?" "I ask that certain missing household embroidery threads be checked. In my private trunk. A governess's trunk is hardly a state secret." Everard spoke. "It is still her property." Lucinda's mouth tightened. "Then perhaps she can explain why part of the very ribbon she used to accuse me was hidden inside it." Harriet kept her voice steady. "I did not put it there." Algernon stepped closer. "Of course not." The sarcasm was mild enough for society, cruel enough for everyone else. Everard took the ribbon from the maid and examined it. Harriet watched him. She knew the moment he noticed it was clean. "This one carries no dressing residue," he said. Lucinda gave a slight shrug. "Perhaps it was washed," Harriet answered, "and then placed beneath my own linen so someone could conveniently discover it." A few guests shifted. Lucinda's eyes hardened. "Unless you intended discovery, why would I? To make yourself indispensable." The sentence landed softly. Too softly. Lucinda continued. "A grieving child trusts you. His father listens to you. A ribbon appears. A damaged trace is found. Suddenly you are the one person everyone must consult." Harriet heard whispers begin at the far side of the gallery. Everard turned sharply, and they stopped. Then the same maid said, "There was something else." Harriet's blood went cold. The maid held out a folded note. Everard took it. The paper was schoolroom stock. Harriet recognized it immediately. He opened it and read in silence. His face changed. "What does it say?" Lucinda asked. Everard did not answer. Harriet looked at him. "Your Grace," he met her eyes. "You should read it." He handed her the page. The handwriting resembled hers, not perfectly, but enough. Harriet read the sentence once, then again. "Philip must remain fearful until after the portrait. Then his Grace will understand whom the boy cannot do without." For several seconds, the gallery seemed to disappear. Harriet heard no footsteps, no whispering, no movement, only her own heartbeat. "That is not mine." Lucinda laughed softly. "The paper is from your schoolroom." "Yes, the handwriting resembles yours, because someone copied it." Algernon said, "How fortunate that every unpleasant piece of evidence now has an invisible author." Harriet looked at him. "And how fortunate for the person who planted it that a governess has less power to survive suspicion than a lord does." The room went silent. Everard read the note again. Harriet watched him. This was worse than the anonymous accusation. That had been crude. This was crafted. Schoolroom paper. Familiar handwriting. A phrase designed to make every act of care look calculated. Lucinda turned toward the guests. "Perhaps now we may ask whether Philip's fear was encouraged." Harriet's hands went cold, but her voice did not shake. "No. You expect everyone to accept that? I expect evidence to be examined." "It has been." "No, it has been displayed." Everard looked at Harriet. The distinction struck him. She saw it, but she also saw the problem. He had a duty to his son. A note apparently written in Harriet's hand had been found with matching ribbon in her trunk. Publicly, in front of witnesses, he could not ignore it. "Miss Rivington," he said. Harriet looked at him. "Yes, Your Grace." He paused, and she understood before he spoke. "Until this is resolved, you will be relieved of nursery duties." The pain was immediate. but she did not show it. Temporarily. Yes. Do you believe I endangered Philip? I did not say that. No. Her voice remained quiet. You are only removing me from him in the room where I am accused. Everard's face tightened. I must protect my son while these facts are examined. And Lucinda? Algernon? Silence followed. Harriet did not need to say more. Everyone understood. They remained beneath the roof. She would be the one removed. Lucinda looked away to hide satisfaction. Everard said, "They are already restricted from being alone with Philip, but not sent away. Harriet." It was the first time he had used her name. The intimacy of it hurt more than formality would have done. She looked at him. "My name does not change the choice you are making." He said nothing. Harriet felt the true wound then, not losing employment, not the money, not even the humiliation. It was Philip. She had taught him that truth should not cost him safety. Now he might wake upstairs and believe that speaking had made her disappear. "Where am I to go?" she asked. Everard answered quietly. "The lodge, until the inquiry is complete." Harriet nodded. "I see." She removed the small ring of schoolroom keys from her belt. The metal felt unexpectedly heavy in her hand. She placed them on the table beside the unfinished portrait sketches. Lucinda said, "His Grace is being generous." Harriet looked at her. Generosity does not become justice merely because it is offered by someone powerful. Algernon's expression hardened. A secretary appeared near the door, carrying a small purse and an envelope. "Your Grace." The arrangements for Miss Rivington. Everard looked toward the purse. "What arrangements?" The secretary hesitated. 3 months' wages and a discreet reference, with the understanding that household matters remain private. Everard's face went cold. "I gave no such instruction." But the damage was already done. Harriet looked at the purse, then at him. "I will not be paid to make their lie convenient." She left it untouched. No one tried to stop her. At the gallery doors, Everard said her name again. Harriet turned. For 1 second, they looked at each other across the same room where he had once defended her. "I am sorry," he said. Harriet felt the words reach her. She also felt how insufficient they were. An apology spoken privately cannot repair an injury given witnesses. Then she left. Hours later, after her small trunk had been sent to the lodge, Philip stood in the nursery, with his wooden soldiers scattered across the carpet. Everard had told him only that Harriet was away while questions were answered. The boy listened without interruption. Then he looked at his father. "Did she go because I told?" "No." "Then why is she gone?" Everard had no answer simple enough to be honest and kind at once. Philip picked up the wooden cavalryman they had found in the south passage. He held it for a long moment. Then he placed it face down on the carpet. "You sent away the only person who listened." Everard stood absolutely still. Philip turned his face away. On the far side of the rug, the unexplained infantryman still waited near the east wall. Harriet spent 1 night at the lodge and discovered that distance did not make Marden Park quieter. It only made the silence more accusing. From the small upstairs room, where she had unpacked almost nothing, she could see the eastern roofs of the great house beyond the bare branches. Somewhere inside those walls, Philip would be waking without her. Somewhere below, servants would be carrying trays, opening shutters, and pretending that nothing had changed. Harriet had refused the purse. She had refused the silence attached to it. Yet she could not refuse memory. Again and again, she saw the nursery carpet with Philip's soldiers arranged across it, the great gallery, the south passage, the solitary officer, the unexplained infantryman near the east wall. She had been too focused on the cavalryman, they found, and Owen's testimony to ask why that one soldier stood apart, facing east. At first light, the thought returned with such force that Harriet rose from the chair. East, not the nursery window, a direction, a place, the East Coach House. 20 minutes later, she was already crossing the footpath beside the kitchen garden, walking quickly enough that cold air tightened her lungs. She had no position now, no authority to question servants, no right to enter the nursery. But she had spent too long teaching Philip that fear deserved attention to ignore the one clue still waiting where he had left it. When she reached the side of the house, she stopped. A pony carriage stood near the steps. The horses were harnessed. Mrs. Archer waited beside Philip, who looked pale and rigid. Lucinda stood below them in a grey travelling cloak. Algernon spoke with a groom near the carriage. Harriet felt every instinct sharpen. Lucinda saw her first, Miss Rivington. Surprise flickered across her face, then displeasure. "What are you doing here?" Harriet looked at Philip. "I came because I remembered something." Philip stared at her as though she had stepped out of a dream. "You came back, yes." The relief in his face hurt more than Harriet expected. Lucinda descended one step. "This is inappropriate. You are no longer responsible for the boy. That is true." Harriet looked toward the waiting carriage. "Where is he going?" Algernon answered. "A short drive." "The Duke cancelled all outings." "He cancelled a ride," Lucinda said. "Philip cannot remain hidden forever because a governess taught him to fear every buckle and shadow." Philip flinched. Harriet saw it. "Does His Grace know about this carriage?" Lucinda's expression hardened. "He is occupied." "That was not my question." Algernon stepped closer. "You no longer command this household." Harriet met his gaze. "I never did." Then she turned to Philip. "Do you want to go?" Lucinda's voice sharpened. "Do not interfere." Harriet did not look at her. Philip stared at the carriage, then shook his head. "No." That single word changed the scene. Mrs. Archer moved closer to him. Algernon's mouth tightened. Lucinda said, "You see what she has done. He now believes every ordinary outing is a danger." Harriet looked at Philip, not Lucinda. "Then let the Duke decide whether this outing is ordinary." A footman had already started toward the house. Lucinda saw him. "Stop." The servant hesitated, caught between rank and consequence. Then Everard appeared in the doorway. He wore no coat, only a dark waistcoat over his white shirt, as though he had left his work the moment raised voices reached him. His gaze went first to Philip, then to the carriage, then to Harriet. For 1 second, surprise broke through his control. "What is happening?" Lucinda answered immediately. "Nothing. I arranged a short drive to prove the boy is perfectly recovered." Everard's face went still. "Without asking me, you were occupied." "That was not permission." Algernon stepped forward. "The carriage is safe." Harriet looked at him. "Has it been inspected?" Everard turned to her. "Why?" Harriet took a breath. "Because I remembered the soldiers." The words stopped him. "Which one?" "The infantryman near the east wall." Philip looked at her. "The East Coach House." Every adult became still. Everard's attention snapped to his son. "That is what it meant." Philip nodded. "Yes." Harriet looked toward the carriage. "I believe he marked another place where something happened, or was meant to happen." Everard stepped down from the doorway. "No one leaves." His voice was calm, absolute. "Mr. Carden is to inspect the carriage now." Lucinda opened her mouth. "Everard, this is becoming. No one leaves." This time she stopped. Mr. Carden arrived within minutes. Harriet stood with Philip and Mrs. Archer, while the head groom examined the harness, shafts, wheels, and fittings. At first, nothing appeared wrong. Then he crouched beside the near wheel and removed his glove. "Your Grace," Everard came closer. "What is it?" Mr. Carden touched the linchpin, holding the wheel assembly in place. "This is not the proper pin." Algernon frowned. "What do you mean?" The groom withdrew it carefully. The metal had been filed down along one side and seated improperly so that it appeared sound while the carriage stood still. Under sustained movement, this could loosen. Harriet felt Philip move closer. His hand found hers. She closed her fingers gently around his. Everard's face lost color. Lucinda said, "That proves nothing about us." Harriet looked at her. "No one said it did." The answer landed more heavily than accusation. Everard turned to Algernon. "Who ordered this carriage prepared?" "I asked that one be made available." "Who selected the groom?" "I do not remember." "Then remember." The Duke's voice had gone cold, "and until you do, neither you nor Lucinda comes within 20 feet of my son without my presence." Lucinda stared at him. "You cannot mean that." "I do." He looked toward Harriet. "Miss Rivington, come with me." Harriet did not release Philip's hand until Mrs. Archer led him back inside. In the study, Everard closed the door and remained standing. Harriet stood opposite him. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then he said, "You were right again." Harriet shook her head. Philip was right again. He accepted the correction. "Yes." He looked exhausted, not evasive. "I failed you." Harriet said nothing. He continued, "I removed you publicly because the evidence was strong enough to require investigation. I still believe it did, but I allowed caution to fall hardest on the person with the least power to survive it." Harriet's throat tightened. It would have been easier if he had defended himself. Easier to remain angry. "I am sorry," he said. "Not because you returned and found another danger. I am sorry because I left your disgrace standing in the room where it was created." Harriet looked at him steadily. "Thank you." Hope moved through his expression. "Too soon." "Return to your position," he said. "Today." "No." He stared at her. Harriet's voice remained calm. "You may restore employment privately. You cannot repair public disgrace that way." Everard did not interrupt. "The people who watched me accused also watched me sent away. The servants heard. Your guests heard. The household learned that suspicion against a governess was enough to remove her, while people with titles remained beneath your roof." His face tightened, but he did not defend himself. "I came back because Philip may still be in danger," Harriet said. "Not because I wanted my position, not because I wanted forgiveness, and not because being useful again erases what happened." Everard lowered his eyes for one moment, then looked at her. "What would repair it? Truth, publicly." He nodded once. "Then that is what I will give you." A hard knock sounded before Harriet could answer. Mr. Carden entered without waiting. His face was grim. "Your Grace, the missing groom, Thomas Hale, has not been found. His bed was not slept in." Everard went still, and the East Coach house. The side door was unlocked before dawn. Harriet looked at him. His wife, still at the estate cottage. Frightened, she says he told her 2 nights ago that he had taken money for work he regretted. Everard's eyes sharpened. "Did he say from whom?" Mr. Carden shook his head. "No, but he told her that if he did not return, she should wait 2 days before giving something to me." Harriet felt the mystery shift again. "What something?" Mr. Carden answered quietly. "She does not know. Only that he hid it before he disappeared." Everard looked toward the window, then back at Harriet. One clue had brought her back to Marden Park. Another had just opened beneath them. The danger had not ended. It had only changed shape. The 2 days passed slowly enough to feel deliberate. Thomas Hale did not return. No message came from him. His wife remained in the estate cottage, with the object he had hidden, obeying the last instruction he had given her because fear had made obedience seem safer than action. Everard did not force her to surrender it early. Harriet noticed that. A week before, he might have demanded answers because he had the rank to demand them. Now he sent Mrs. Bell to reassure the woman that she would not be punished for her husband's choices, and that no one would enter the cottage without permission. Harriet remained at Marden Park, though she did not resume her position. She stayed because Philip was still frightened, because the danger had not ended, and because leaving after returning would have made her brave decision feel like a temporary interruption rather than a choice. On the second evening, Mrs. Bell entered the schoolroom, carrying a small cedar box. Philip sat on the rug with his wooden soldiers before him. Everard stood near the window. Harriet looked at the box. "What is that?" Mrs. Bell set it carefully on the table. It belonged to the late Duchess. Philip's hand tightened around the hollow-based soldier. Everard turned. "Why bring it now?" The housekeeper hesitated. "Because I remembered something Her Grace once said about that toy." Silence fell. Mrs. Bell lifted the lid. Inside lay a child's wool cap, several nursery drawings, a faded christening ribbon, and a folded scrap of paper covered in the late Duchess's handwriting. Harriet did not touch anything. Neither did Everard. Mrs. Bell picked up the paper and read softly. "A soldier keeps watch when a little boy cannot speak." Philip went still. Harriet looked at him. "Did your mother say that to you?" He nodded. "When I had bad dreams." Everard lowered his eyes. Mrs. Bell continued. "Her Grace asked the estate carpenter to hollow the base. She said children sometimes needed somewhere safe, for things adults were too hurried to hear." Everard's face tightened. "I did not know." "No, Your Grace." There was no accusation in Mrs. Bell's voice. That made the words heavier. Philip opened the wooden compartment with his thumb. It was empty now. Harriet sat several feet from him, careful not to crowd. "You used it because your mother told you it could keep something safe." "Yes. And the other soldiers?" He looked down. "They remember." Harriet glanced at Everard. He understood. Not a game, a sequence. Memory given shape. She pointed to the cavalryman near the edge of the rug, the great gallery. Yes, the drummer, the south passage. Another nod. Then the infantryman near the east wall, the east coach house. Yes. Harriet looked at the solitary officer standing apart from the others. Philip did not touch it. She waited. Everard took one step closer, then stopped. Harriet saw him choose patience. "Some soldiers are places," Harriet said. "Some are people." Philip nodded. "Who is that one?" His fingers moved toward the officer, but stopped just short of touching it. "Lord Algernon." The room changed. Everard's face became unreadable. Harriet kept her voice steady. "Why did you not say his name before?" Philip stared at the wooden figure. "Because Lady Lucinda said you'd be sent away if I told." He looked at Harriet. "And because when I named people before, grown-ups started arguing." Harriet felt the truth of that more sharply than accusation. Philip had not believed that speaking would lead to safety. He had believed it would create noise, anger, and loss. Everard lowered himself beside the rug, not close enough to touch his son without invitation. "Philip." The boy looked at him. "I should have listened sooner." Philip's face did not change. Everard continued. "After your mother died, I thought silence meant you were recovering. You slept. You ate. You studied. You stopped crying where I could see you." His voice roughened slightly. "I mistook quietness for healing." Philip looked down at the soldiers. You were busy. The simple defense struck harder than anger. Everard swallowed. Yes, everyone was. Harriet saw the Duke flinch. Philip picked up the hollow soldier. Mamma listened. I know. Everard's voice was quiet. Harriet did not try to repair that grief. She only said, "Then listen now." Everard looked at her. The room seemed to narrow around the sentence. He had failed Philip by mistaking silence for recovery. He had failed Harriet by mistaking caution for fairness. Now both truths stood before him, and he did not turn away. Philip began moving the soldiers again. Great Gallery, South Passage, East Coach House. Then the solitary officer. "He was there?" Harriet asked. Philip nodded. "Near the passage. I heard him talking." "With Lady Lucinda?" "I think so." Harriet did not press. "And at the East Coach House?" Philip hesitated. "I heard them say Thomas would do it." Everard's gaze sharpened. "Do what?" Philip's shoulders tightened. Harriet shook her head almost imperceptibly. Everard stopped. "You do not have to answer now," he said. Philip exhaled. Harriet noticed the progress. Not perfection. Progress. Mrs. Bell quietly left the keepsake box open on the table. After Philip went with Mrs. Archer to rest, Harriet remained in the schoolroom with Everard. For a while neither spoke. Then he asked, "What life would you have chosen if necessity had never made you a governess?" Harriet turned toward him. The question was so unlike anything she expected that she almost laughed. "That is an unusual inquiry from an employer who has not restored my employment. Then answer a man rather than an employer." The words were restrained, but the room changed. Harriet looked toward the windows. "I once wanted to open a small school. For boys? No, for daughters of reduced gentlewomen." He waited. She continued. "Girls who were educated until their fathers died, or fortunes failed, or brothers inherited everything. Girls who were suddenly expected to survive on accomplishments that had never been meant to earn bread." Everard's gaze remained on her. "And you would teach them to read well, write well, keep accounts, understand languages, teach others, enough to remain useful without being made helpless. You have thought about it for a long time. Some dreams survive because one never has the luxury of attempting them." Harriet expected an offer, money, a building, a duke's instinct to solve. Everard gave none. Instead, he asked, "What would you call it?" She looked at him. "I do not know." "Then perhaps it is not too late to decide." Something quiet passed between them, not rescue, not gratitude, attention. A knock sounded before either could say more. Mrs. Bell entered with Mr. Carden, and a woman wrapped in a dark shawl. Harriet recognized fear before introduction. Thomas Hale's wife. She was perhaps 30, tired and holding a folded paper so tightly that the edges had softened beneath her fingers. "Your Grace," she said. Everard did not approach too quickly. "Mrs. Hale." She nodded. "It has been 2 days." "Yes," her voice shook. "Thomas told me if he did not come back by tonight, I was to give this to Mr. Carden." She looked toward the head groom, then at Harriet. "I almost burned it." Harriet spoke gently. "Why did you not?" Mrs. Hale's eyes filled. "Because he said if I burned it, someone might believe he took money for nothing." She held out the paper. Mr. Carden accepted it and placed it on the table. Everard unfolded it. Harriet moved closer. The receipt recorded a payment far larger than any ordinary stable repair. Beneath the amount were the initials A.H. and a short notation concerning work at the East Coach House. One corner carried a dark grease mark. No ribbon, no decorative clue, only money, initials, location, and a hidden transaction that had never entered the estate books. Everard read it twice. "Did your husband tell you who paid him?" Mrs. Hale swallowed. He said Lord Algernon gave him the money. No one moved. Harriet looked at the initials. A. H. Algernon Hawkridge. Everard's face became cold. And what was the work? Mrs. Hale shook her head. He wouldn't tell me. Only that it was supposed to look like no one's fault. Harriet felt the blood leave her face. The same words Philip had used. Across the table, Everard looked at her. Neither needed to speak. The child had not invented the phrase. He had heard it. And now the missing groom's wife had brought them the first piece of evidence that connected money, location, and Lord Algernon to the plan. The receipt changed the balance of the investigation, but it did not solve the mystery. By the following morning, Harriet and Everard sat in the Duke's study with Mrs. Bell, Mr. Carden, and the household papers spread across the desk. The original ribbon lay on one folded cloth. The forged note lay on another. Thomas Hale's receipt rested beside the ledger that contained no record of his payment. Everard had spent most of the night awake. Harriet knew because his face carried the controlled exhaustion of a man who had stopped pretending that vigilance could substitute for sleep. He looked at the papers and said, "We have 3 questions left." Harriet nodded. Who forged the note? Why the portrait had to come before the planned accident? And whether Algernon paid Thomas Hale for the work at the East Coach House. Mrs. Bell added quietly, "Mrs. Hale's statement gives us the last answer, Your Grace." Harriet looked toward the folded receipt. "It gives us a witness and a payment. It does not yet prove what work was purchased." Everard's gaze moved to her. "You still refuse to overstate." Someone should. A shadow of recognition passed across his face. He had heard that answer before. Mrs. Bell reached for the forged note. "There may be something else." Harriet turned. The housekeeper placed the page beside several examples of Harriet's schoolroom writing. Copybook corrections, lesson instructions, a list of books Philip had completed. At first glance, the resemblance was uncomfortable. The same narrow slant, similar capitals, similar spacing. But Mrs. Bell tapped one phrase on the forged page, Master Philip. Harriet looked closer. "Yes, you use that form when speaking. Of course, but not in formal house notes." Harriet understood at once. She pulled one genuine instruction sheet toward them. "Every written reference to the boy," said Master Hawkridge. "I was taught never to write a future peer's Christian name in household instructions, unless addressing him privately." Everard leaned over the desk. "So the writer copied your hand, but not your habits." "Yes." Harriet looked at the forged note again. "Someone had seen enough of my writing to imitate it, but not enough to understand how I actually write in different circumstances." Mrs. Bell's expression sharpened. There was a reason Lady Lucinda asked for samples. Everard straightened. "What samples?" 3 weeks ago, she asked whether Miss Rivington's hand was suitable for copying names onto invitation cards. She said the young lady who usually assisted her had taken ill. Harriet went still. "I was never told." "Because the request came through a maid." She took 2 pages from the schoolroom wastebasket. Everard's face hardened. "Which maid?" Mrs. Bell hesitated. "Lucy Fenwick, young, frightened easily. She told me only this morning, because I asked who had handled schoolroom papers before the second ribbon was found." Harriet looked at him. "Do not frighten her." "I was not planning to." "You were thinking about it." His mouth tightened. "I was thinking about answers. Those are not always found by the same method." Mrs. Bell almost smiled, but thought better of it. Everard exhaled. "Bring the girl here, quietly. She will not be accused." Lucy arrived 10 minutes later, pale and shaking. Harriet stood away from the desk, so the maid would not feel surrounded. Everard did not question her immediately. He said, "You are not in trouble." The girl looked uncertain. "Yes, Your Grace. That was not a question." She swallowed. Harriet stepped closer. "Tell only what you remember." Lucy nodded. "Lady Lucinda asked me to bring her examples of Miss Rivington's handwriting. She said it was for invitations. Did she keep them?" Everard asked. "Yes, Your Grace. Did anyone else see them?" "I don't know." "Did Lady Lucinda ask you to enter Miss Rivington's room?" Lucy's face changed. "No." Harriet watched her carefully. "Did anyone?" The maid's eyes filled. "Her ladyship told me to check linen thread in the governess's trunk," she said. "I wasn't to disturb anything else." Everard's jaw tightened. "And the ribbon? I found it there. I swear I did." "I believe you," Harriet said. The girl looked at her in surprise. Harriet continued, "Finding something is not the same as putting it there." Lucy nodded rapidly. "I didn't put it there, miss. Did you see anyone enter my room earlier?" Lucy hesitated. "Lady Lucinda's maid was there that morning." Everard glanced at Mrs. Bell. The housekeeper understood. "I will speak with her." After Lucy left, Harriet returned to the desk. "The forged note is becoming easier to explain." Everard looked at her, "and harder to forgive." Harriet did not answer that. Forgiveness was not yet the work before them. Truth was. Everard turned toward the window. "I can confront Lucinda and Algernon now." Harriet's voice stopped him. "No." He looked back. "We have enough. To accuse privately, to demand answers. And if they lie, then I will know." Harriet shook her head. "No, you will suspect." His expression hardened slightly. "What do you suggest?" "The same room where my disgrace was made public." He understood immediately. The great gallery. "Yes." "With witnesses." "Yes." Everard was silent for several seconds. "You want the county gathered again?" "Not the county. Only those who were present when I was accused, senior household witnesses, the solicitor, and those necessary to establish the facts. That is, still a public reckoning." Harriet looked at him steadily. "My disgrace was given witnesses. Truth should not be denied them." He walked toward the desk. "And you intend to speak?" "I do. Then I will stand with you, beside me." Everard paused. Harriet continued, "Not before me. Do not silence the room before I have spoken. Do not answer for me. Do not decide what part of my injury is convenient to admit." The words were quiet, but they carried everything between them. The gallery, the keys, the lodge, the word Harriet spoken too late to soften a public wrong. Everard accepted each one without defense. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Stand beside me. Do not speak for me until I ask." His gaze held hers. "Beside you until you tell me otherwise." Harriet felt something shift. Trust did not return because he said the right thing. It returned because he had begun to understand what the wrong thing had cost. Before she could answer, a footman entered with another message. Mrs. Hale had been approached at her cottage, not threatened, offered help. Lucinda had sent word that the woman's children could be placed in a better cottage and her debts settled if she chose not to involve herself in a family scandal. Everard's face became cold. Harriet looked toward the receipt. "There is your final counterattack. I will send men to guard her cottage. Send Mrs. Bell first." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because a frightened woman may trust protection more easily when it does not arrive in boots." Mrs. Bell inclined her head. Everard agreed. That afternoon, Mrs. Hale came to the house voluntarily. She looked more tired than before, but steadier. Harriet met her in the morning room with Mrs. Bell present. "Did Lady Lucinda offer you money?" Harriet asked. "Not directly. A message came through her maid. And what did you answer?" Mrs. Hale drew herself upright. I said my husband already took money once for work he regretted. I won't let our children live on the same mistake. Harriet felt the force of the answer. Everard, standing near the door, did too. Will you speak in the gallery tomorrow? He asked. Mrs. Hale looked frightened again. Harriet did not intervene. The choice had to be hers. After a long moment, the woman nodded. Yes, Your Grace, Everard said. You may stop at any time. Harriet glanced at him. He had learned that sentence from Philip. Later, when the room had emptied, Everard remained beside the evidence table. Tomorrow, he said, they will know we are not hiding this. Harriet looked at the forged note, the receipt, and the original ribbon. They already know. Then they may try something else, probably. You are not afraid? Harriet considered the question. Yes. His eyes lifted. You do not look afraid. That is not the same thing. He absorbed the answer. What are you afraid of? Harriet looked toward the closed doors. That truth will be made to look like ambition again. That Philip will be called confused. That Mrs. Hale will be called desperate. That Owen will be called a servant who misunderstood. People with rank have many words for making powerless witnesses seem unreliable. Everard's face changed. Then tomorrow they will not stand alone. Harriet met his gaze. Neither will I. No, his answer came without hesitation. You will not. The next morning the great gallery was prepared. The portrait remained covered. The solicitor arrived. Mr. Carden and Mr. Bell took their places. Owen waited near the wall. Mrs. Hale stood beside Mrs. Bell. Selected guests entered in restrained silence. Harriet came last among them. Every conversation faded. Then Everard crossed the gallery. He stopped beside her. Not ahead, not in front, beside. He said nothing. Harriet looked toward the covered canvas where Philip had once refused to stand, somewhere beyond the doors. Lucinda and Algernon were approaching. This time, the room was not waiting for a frightened child to perform normality. It was waiting for the truth to explain why someone had needed him to. Lucinda entered first, wearing grey silk trimmed at the cuffs with scarlet and silver. Algernon followed several steps behind her, composed enough to suggest that every person waiting in the great gallery had gathered for an inconvenience rather than an accusation. The covered portrait stood at the far end beneath the painted faces of 6 dead dukes. Harriet remained where she was. Everard stood beside her, exactly as he had promised. Not ahead, not speaking, not rescuing, waiting. Lucinda looked around the room and gave a faint smile. How theatrical. Harriet met her gaze. The room was chosen because this is where the trouble began. No, Lucinda said, this is where you taught a frightened child to become interesting. A few guests shifted. Harriet did not answer the insult. She turned instead toward the people who had once watched her accused. Several days ago, Master Philip refused to stand for the family portrait. Her voice was calm. He said only, not after the picture. At the time, no one knew why. She glanced toward the covered canvas. The portrait was meant to show the county that the future Duke of Alverton was healthy, calm, and recovered from grief. Lord Algernon had been among those most eager for it to be completed before Philip's next ride. Algernon folded his arms because the boy cannot live forever as though the world is dangerous. Harriet looked at him. The world was dangerous to him. Silence followed. She continued. A scarlet and silver ribbon was found inside the hollow base of his wooden soldier. It carried tack dressing residue from the south stables. Soon afterward, Mr. Carden discovered that a leather trace associated with Philip's riding equipment had been deliberately cut from the underside. Mr. Carden stepped forward with the damaged leather wrapped in cloth. The cut was made by hand, he said, not by wear, not by age. Harriet let the fact stand. She did not repeat what everyone already knew. Then we found something else, a witness. Owen Pike stood near the wall, pale but upright. Harriet turned toward him. You do not have to speak if you no longer wish to. Owen looked at Everard. The Duke said only, tell the truth. Nothing more is required. Owen nodded. Harriet asked, where were you on the afternoon before the portrait sitting? Near the South Passage, miss. What did you see? Master Philip running through the corridor. He had one of his wooden cavalrymen. Did you see anyone else? Only part of a lady's skirt, dark red. I didn't see her face. Harriet nodded. Then you cannot identify her. No, miss. Lucinda's mouth tightened slightly. Harriet continued. Did you hear anyone? Owen looked toward Algernon. Yes. Whom? Lord Algernon. Algernon gave a cold laugh. A stable boy recognizes noble voices through walls now. Owen flushed. Harriet stepped in before fear could silence him. Did you recognize the voice before anyone asked you whose it was? Yes, miss. What did you hear? Owen swallowed. He said, the boy must not be allowed to spoil the plan. A murmur moved through the gallery. Everard did not silence it. Harriet waited until it faded on its own. Algernon said, a fragment, nothing more. Yes, Harriet replied, a fragment, which is why we looked for more. She turned toward Mrs. Hale. The groom's wife stood beside Mrs. Bell, clutching the edge of her shawl. Harriet approached, but stopped several feet away. Mrs. Hale, did your husband leave something with you before he disappeared? Yes, miss. What? Mrs. Hale held out the folded receipt. The solicitor received it and read the amount aloud. Several guests exchanged glances. Harriet said, the payment never entered the estate accounts. It bears the initials A.H. and a notation concerning work at the East Coach House. Algernon's expression did not change. Initials prove little. Agreed. Harriet looked at Mrs. Hale. Did your husband tell you who paid him? Lord Algernon. This time the murmur was louder. Algernon's face hardened. Your husband is missing. Conveniently. Mrs. Hale flinched. Everard moved half a step forward, then stopped himself. Harriet remained the one who spoke. Mrs. Hale came because her husband told her to wait 2 days and then bring the receipt to Mr. Carden. She was approached afterward with an offer of help if she chose not to involve herself in a family scandal. Lucinda's eyes flashed. You accuse me of bribery now? Mrs. Hale answered before Harriet could. The message came through your maid. Lucinda went still. Harriet let the silence settle. Then she turned back toward the room. There was one question none of us could answer at first. Why did the danger have to come after the portrait? Every face seemed to turn toward the covered canvas. Harriet continued. The answer was not in the ribbon. It was in the story someone needed the county to believe. Algernon's jaw tightened. Harriet looked toward the painter, who stood near one of the easels. Sir, did Lord Algernon speak to you about the timing of the portrait? The painter hesitated. Yes. What did he say? That it must be completed quickly, before the boy resumed more independent riding. Why? He said the county needed to see the heir looking strong and composed, that once everyone saw him standing beside his father, talk of nerves would disappear. Harriet looked at the assembled guests. A healthy heir, a calm heir, a child no one believed was afraid. Then she faced Algernon. After that, an accident would look like misfortune. The room went silent. Lucinda spoke quickly. This is speculation. Not entirely. Harriet turned toward the gallery doors. They opened. Philip stood there with Mrs. Archer. The wooden toy soldier rested in his hand. Everard's entire expression changed. "Philip," the boy stopped. Everard did not call him closer. "Do you wish to be here?" Philip looked at Harriet, then at his father. "Yes." "Do you wish to speak?" "Yes. You may stop whenever you choose." Philip nodded and crossed the room. He stopped beside Harriet, not behind her. She did not touch him. He looked toward the covered portrait first. "I didn't want the picture because they said after it everyone would think I was fine." Harriet kept her voice soft. "Who said that?" Philip looked at Lucinda. "Lady Lucinda told me people would stop fussing once they saw me standing beside father." Lucinda's face went rigid. "Philip, you are confused." Everard's voice cut across the room. "Do not interrupt him." Philip tightened his hold on the soldier. "I heard Lord Algernon say the picture had to happen first. He said if everyone saw me looking normal, no one would ask why I rode alone after." No one moved. Harriet asked, "Where did you hear that?" "Near the South Passage." "Did you hear anything else?" Philip looked at Algernon. He said, "After the portrait, the boy rides alone." Lucinda stepped forward. "He is 8 years old. He has been frightened, coached, and surrounded by adults discussing danger." Harriet looked at Philip. "Do you want to continue?" He nodded. Lady Lucinda came out of the passage. I had already hidden the ribbon inside my soldier. She didn't know I took it. She said if I told stories, Miss Rivington would be sent away. Harriet felt the words strike through the room. She did not look at Everard. "Not yet," Philip continued. "I thought if I named people, grown-ups would argue and she would go." His eyes moved toward Harriet, and she did. Everard closed his eyes briefly. The hurt was visible. Harriet let it remain. This was not the moment to protect him from truth. Algernon gave a short, sharp laugh. "And now we are to accept a child's memory as proof of a conspiracy." Harriet turned toward him. "No, the child's memory is one part. The cut leather is another. The payment is another. Owen's testimony is another. Your restricted knowledge is another." Algernon's eyes narrowed. "What restricted knowledge?" Harriet did not answer immediately. He had already shown too much once when discussing the bay pony. She waited. Silence made careless people speak. Algernon took the bait. "You have no proof I knew anything about the trace beyond what any groom might have said. A cut hidden beneath the lower bend near the buckle is hardly some sacred secret." Mr. Carden's face changed. The solicitor turned slowly toward him. Everard became completely still. Harriet felt the entire room understand at once. She said quietly, "That detail was never disclosed." Algernon's face lost color. Harriet continued, "Not to the guests, not to Lady Lucinda, not in any household discussion outside this investigation." The words landed one by one. The exact cut was hidden beneath the lower bend of the leather near the buckle. "Only Mr. Carden, the Duke, Mr. Bell, and I saw it before today." Lucinda closed her eyes. Philip moved one step closer to Harriet. Everard finally spoke. His voice was quiet enough that everyone had to listen. "Algernon, how did you know where the leather had been cut?" For the first time since the portrait had been abandoned, Lord Algernon Hawkridge had no answer. Algernon's silence lasted only a few seconds. But in the great gallery, it felt like a confession. Every eye remained on him. The solicitor stood near the table, where the receipt and damaged leather had been placed. Mr. Carden held himself rigid beside the wrapped trace. Philip stayed close to Harriet, gripping the wooden soldier in both hands. Lucinda looked at her brother with the desperate stillness of someone willing him to invent an answer before the room understood too much. At last, Algernon drew a breath. "Thomas Hale told me." Everard did not move. "When?" before he disappeared. That is not an answer. A few days ago, Mr. Carden frowned. Harriet looked toward Mrs. Hale. Her face had gone pale. Everard continued. Thomas Hale vanished after the East Coach House carriage had already been prepared. The cut trace was discovered before that. Algernon's expression hardened. Then he told me earlier. When? I don't remember the exact day. Convenient. Algernon turned toward him. You have already decided what you want to believe. Everard's voice remained controlled. No, I am asking you to explain how a missing groom told you the exact location of damage before the sequence you claim could have happened. Algernon said nothing. Harriet watched Lucinda. Her left hand had moved beneath the fold of her skirt. Not casually, concealingly. Harriet's gaze dropped to the cuff of her grey silk sleeve. The scarlet and silver trim ended unevenly several inches before the wrist. A section was missing. Lucinda saw where Harriet was looking and drew her arm closer to her body. Too late. Everard noticed. So did Mrs. Bell. The housekeeper stepped forward. Your Grace. She carried a small work basket Harriet had not seen before. From it, she removed a labelled card bearing a short sample of scarlet ribbon edged with silver. Her ladyship's riding habit was altered at Marden Park 3 months ago. I keep household trimming samples when garments are adjusted here. Lucinda's face lost colour. Many dressmakers use similar ribbon. Mrs. Bell did not argue. She simply placed the sample beside the original strip Philip had hidden in his soldier. The width matched. The weave appeared the same. The silver border was identical in pattern. The solicitor leaned closer, but did not touch either piece. This is not conclusive proof by itself, he said, but it is certainly relevant when considered with the rest. Harriet appreciated the restraint. No grand declaration, no impossible certainty. Only another piece joining the others. Lucinda looked toward Everard. You would let servants compare scraps from my clothing before county guests. Everard's expression changed. You allowed a maid to display evidence from Harriet's private trunk before witnesses. Lucinda went still. The words returned the gallery to the day. Harriet had been accused. Everyone remembered. Lucinda's composure finally began to crack. You do not understand what was at stake. Harriet looked at her. Then explain it. Lucinda turned toward her with open anger. You think virtue is easy because you have nothing to lose. Harriet did not flinch. Lucinda continued. Algernon's creditors were closing in. The Wexford branch had already lost land, income, respect. Do you know what remains for an unmarried woman when her family's protection collapses? Harriet's face remained calm. Yes, the answer stopped Lucinda. Harriet went on. More than you seem to think. Lucinda's mouth opened, then closed. Harriet said quietly, Need did not make the choice for you. The room fell silent. Lucinda looked away first. Algernon stepped toward the evidence table. Enough of this. His composure was gone now. A strip of ribbon, a servant's wife, a frightened boy, and accounts none of you understand do not make me guilty. His hand moved toward the receipt. Mr. Carden stepped between him and the table. Do not touch that, my lord. Algernon stared at him. Stand aside. No. The single word from a servant to a peer shocked the room more than shouting would have done. Everard lifted one hand before tempers could rise. No one is to be harmed. The evidence remains where it is. Algernon turned sharply. You would restrain me in your own house? I would prevent evidence from being destroyed. Everard looked toward the solicitor. The magistrate has already been summoned. The gates are to be watched until he arrives. No one leaves with papers, household records, or evidence. No one is to be treated as guilty before lawful examination. The distinction was deliberate. Harriet heard it. So did the solicitor. Algernon's face tightened. "You prepared this in advance," Harriet answered. "We prepared for truth to be resisted." Lucinda looked toward Philip. He moved closer to Harriet. Everard saw it. His expression hardened in a way Harriet had not seen before. "You will not approach my son again." Lucinda stared at him. "Everard, you cannot cast me out on the word of a child. I am not." His voice was quiet. "I am acting on a threatened child, a planted ribbon, forged handwriting, a hidden payment, 2 acts of sabotage, a witness account, and your own attempt to silence Mrs. Hale with promised assistance." Lucinda went white. "I offered kindness." Mrs. Hale spoke from beside Mrs. Bell. "Kindness that required my silence. No one answered that." Everard turned to Mrs. Bell. "Lady Lucinda's belongings will be packed. She will leave Marden Park under escort after the magistrate has taken what statement he requires. She will have no private access to Philip. My patronage and protection are withdrawn." A murmur moved through the room. Lucinda understood the consequence immediately. In their world, loss of ducal protection would travel farther than any public accusation. Yet Everard was not finished. He waited until the gallery became still again. Then he turned away from Lucinda and Algernon. He faced Harriet. She saw the moment he could have chosen silence. The villains had been exposed. The room was already prepared to admire him for acting. He could have allowed their guilt to erase his mistake. He did not. There is another wrong to correct. Every eye returned to him. Harriet felt Philip's small shoulder against her arm. Everard stood in the same room where he had ordered her removed. "I dismissed Miss Rivington from my son's side while allowing those who accused her to remain beneath my roof." The gallery became utterly quiet. I told myself caution required it. I believed I was protecting Philip while evidence was examined, but the burden of suspicion fell most heavily on the person with the least power to survive it. Harriet stopped breathing for a moment. Everard continued. "That error was mine." He did not look away from her. "Miss Rivington's reputation was injured before witnesses. Therefore, my apology will not be private." Lucinda closed her eyes. Algernon stared at the floor. Everard's voice remained steady. "Harriet Rivington acted with courage when others preferred comfort. She listened when my son could not yet explain his fear. She returned to protect him after I had given her every reason to stay away. Her judgment prevented harm more than once." Harriet felt every gaze turn toward her. This time she did not shrink. Everard continued. "She will receive an independent reference, compensation without condition, complete freedom to leave Marden Park, and no obligation to return to employment. No silence will be purchased. No gratitude will be demanded." Harriet looked at him. He had understood the thing that mattered most. Vindication without freedom would still have been another form of control. Philip tugged lightly at her sleeve. "May I show you something?" She looked down. "Of course." He led her toward the covered portrait sketches. The painter stepped forward and removed a smaller sheet from behind one of the preliminary studies. Master Philip added this before the first sitting ended. In the margin of the family arrangement stood a tiny female figure drawn in pencil. Plain dress, dark hair, standing near the boy. Harriet stared at it. Philip said, "I put you there because you listened." The simplicity of the words nearly undid her. She lowered herself until they were eye to eye. "You did not need to give me a place." Philip looked at her with quiet certainty. "I know." Then he held up the wooden soldier. "I chose to." Harriet closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, Everard was watching from several feet away. He did not step closer. He let the moment belong to her and Philip. That, more than any grand gesture, told her something had changed. The magistrate arrived before sunset. Statements were taken. The receipt, forged note, original ribbon, damaged trace, carriage linchpin, household records, and witness accounts were placed under formal examination. Algernon did not confess. Lucinda did not either. But neither could explain the sequence that now existed around them. By evening, the guests had gone, the evidence had been secured, and Philip had returned upstairs with Mrs. Archer. Harriet remained alone in the great gallery for a moment, facing the covered portrait. Everard entered quietly. He stopped beside her. "You are free to leave tomorrow. I know, and I will not ask you to return as governess." Harriet turned toward him. "Good." Something almost like a smile touched his face. Then it disappeared. "May I ask something else?" "You may ask." He took a breath. "When you are no longer in my employ, and when there is no duty binding you to this house, would you permit me to court you?" Harriet held his gaze. She thought of the man who had once mistaken silence for recovery and caution for justice. She thought of the man who had stood beside her today and publicly named his own failure. "You may court me, Your Grace." Hope moved through his face. Harriet raised one hand slightly. "You may not assume the answer this time." He did smile. "Quietly. I've learned not to." Several months later, on the morning the completed family portrait was finally to be unveiled, Harriet stood outside the great gallery and listened to Philip argue with a footman about whether the wooden soldier required a place of honor. "He does," Philip insisted. "He kept the truth safe before any of you knew there was a truth to keep." The footman, who had clearly learned that arguing with the future Duke of Alverton was less dangerous than arguing with him when Harriet was within hearing distance, bowed gravely. "Then I stand corrected, Master Philip." Harriet smiled before entering. The house had changed since the day she had left it with her schoolroom keys placed beside an unfinished sketch. Not suddenly, not perfectly, but truly. The magistrate had taken formal statements from every relevant witness. Thomas Hale had been found 3 weeks after his disappearance in Portsmouth, frightened, ashamed, and alive. He admitted that Algernon had paid him first to weaken the leather trace and later to prepare the carriage at the East Coach House, so that a failure would appear accidental. Hale had fled when he realized Philip might actually be harmed, and when Algernon demanded silence. His testimony, Mrs. Hale's receipt, Owen's account, the household records, the forged note, and Algernon's own knowledge of the hidden cut had been enough for formal proceedings to continue. Algernon had been committed for trial on charges arising from bribery, sabotage, conspiracy, and attempts to endanger the heir. His debts had consumed what remained of his property and influence. He would never again be permitted near Philip or Marden Park. Lucinda had not been charged with every act Harriet believed she had helped conceal, but her role in threatening Philip, planting suspicion against Harriet, and trying to purchase Mrs. Hale's silence had ended her place within Everard's protection. She had left Hampshire for relatives who received her out of duty rather than affection. No one at Marden Park spoke of her as though social disgrace were justice enough. They simply understood that consequence had finally reached people who had spent too long believing rank could keep it away. Harriet had not remained at Marden Park as governess. The morning after the great gallery reckoning, she had accepted the independent reference. Everard promised, and left for a modest furnished house near Winchester, where she began preparing plans for the school she had once mentioned almost by accident. That decision surprised society more than her refusal of the Duke's immediate protection. Harriet understood why. Many people could imagine a governess wanting to become a duchess. Fewer could imagine a woman asking first who she wished to be when no one needed saving. Everard courted her properly. He wrote only after receiving permission. He called only when invited. Once, during the first month, he arrived 10 minutes early and waited outside beneath a bare elm because Harriet had not yet asked him in. When she opened the door and found the Duke of Alverton standing on the path with rain on his coat, she stared at him. "You could have knocked." "I could have." "Then why didn't you?" He looked at the closed door behind her. "Because your door is not mine to open." That was the first moment she laughed with him when no danger stood nearby. No child was frightened. No evidence waited on a table. No one required rescue. There was only Everard, wet from the rain and looking almost offended by the weather, and Harriet, laughing harder than dignity allowed. Weeks later, during a walk beyond Winchester, he asked, "What would you build if no one needed you to save them?" Harriet knew the answer by then. A school. For daughters of reduced gentlewomen. She looked at him. "You remembered." "I remember most things you say. That sounds dangerous." "It has proved so." She smiled. "And what would you do with this knowledge?" "Nothing without being asked." He paused. "But when you build it, would you let me see it?" Not buy it. Not fund it before she had chosen how. Not place his name above the door. See it. Harriet understood then that he had finally learned the difference between support and ownership. She accepted him 2 months later. Their wedding took place quietly in the estate chapel before Philip, Mrs. Archer, Mrs. Bell, Mr. Carden, a few relatives, and enough witnesses to satisfy propriety without turning happiness into spectacle. Now, 3 weeks after the wedding, Harriet had returned to Marden Park not as an employee, not as a grateful dependent, and not because a child had needed her. She had returned because she had chosen a life that included Everard Philip and the work she still intended to build beyond the walls of the estate. Philip saw her at the gallery entrance and ran toward her with the wooden soldier in one hand. "You're late." Harriet looked toward the clock. "By 30 seconds. That still counts." "Then I ask mercy," Philip considered. "Granted." Everard approached more slowly from the far end of the corridor. He stopped beside Harriet, not before her. Some habits had become promises without needing to be spoken. Philip looked from one adult to the other. Then his expression grew serious. "May I ask something?" Harriet nodded. "Of course." He tightened his grip on the soldier. "Are you staying because you want to?" Harriet felt Everard become still beside her. He did not answer for her. "Yes," she said. Philip studied her face. "Not because I need you?" "No." "Not because father asked?" "No." Everard raised one eyebrow, but remained silent. Harriet continued, "I am staying because I choose to." Philip nodded slowly. Relief entered his face, but it was different from the desperate relief he had shown when Harriet returned from the lodge. This was not fear of losing her. It was trust in her freedom. "Good," he said, "because I asked for the new portrait myself." Harriet looked toward the closed gallery doors. "Why?" Philip shrugged, then thought better of it. "The first time, I thought if I stood there, everything after would happen whether I wanted it or not." Everard lowered his gaze. Philip continued, "This time I know I can say no before I say yes." Harriet felt the words move through all 3 of them. She knelt so they were eye to eye. Then that is a very good reason to say yes. Philip pushed open the gallery doors. Morning light entered through the tall windows. The 6 dead dukes still watched from the walls, but the room no longer belonged to them alone. The new portrait stood at the far end beneath a silk covering. Mrs. Bell, Mrs. Archer, Mr. Carden, Owen Pike, the painter, and a small gathering of trusted household members waited nearby. No applause followed Harriet's entrance. She was grateful for that. The room had once watched her publicly disgraced. It did not need to perform affection to prove it had changed. Respect was quieter. The painter stepped forward. "Your Grace." Everard looked at Philip. "Would you like to do it?" Philip nodded. He took the cord and pulled. The covering fell away. Harriet stopped breathing for a moment. Everard stood on one side of Philip. Harriet stood on the other. No one towered, no one possessed. Her painted hand rested near Philip's shoulder without touching him. Everard's expression held strength without severity. Philip stood between them, not as a symbol of inheritance, but as a boy who had finally been allowed to say what frightened him. Harriet looked at her own painted face and felt something unfamiliar, not vanity, recognition. She had spent years at the edge of rooms, near enough to be useful and far enough to disappear. Now she stood in the center because she had chosen the place. Philip walked toward the mantel beneath the portrait and set the wooden soldier there. The hollow base had been repaired, but the compartment still opened. Harriet joined him. "Does he still keep watch?" "Yes." Philip turned the soldier over and opened the little panel. It was empty, no ribbon, no folded warning, no secret waiting for courage. Harriet touched the carved base. "Why leave it open?" Philip thought for a moment. "In case someone needs to tell the truth slowly." Harriet felt tears press behind her eyes. She smiled instead, then let it stay open. But no truth in this house should ever have to hide in order to survive. Everard came to stand beside them. He looked at the soldier, then at Philip, then at Harriet. "Then that will be proved by what we do next." Harriet turned toward him. There was no grand vow, no demand that anyone trust forever, because one good ending had been earned, only accountability continuing into tomorrow. From that day, standing household orders governed who might enter Philip's rooms privately. Mrs. Bell maintained a nursery book recording authorized visitors. No relation, however highly born, could overrule Everard's express instructions concerning his son. Philip chose the adults he could approach freely, and no one dismissed his fear because it arrived before explanation. Harriet's school near Winchester opened the following year. Everard attended only after receiving an invitation. Philip insisted on carrying the wooden soldier with him, though Harriet told him repeatedly that schools did not generally require military supervision. "This one does," he said. Years later, Harriet would remember many things about that morning in the great gallery. Philip's laughter, Everard's hand finding hers when no one was looking, the absence of Lucinda's voice, the quiet knowledge that Algernon could never again come near the child he had tried to turn into an obstacle. But most of all, she remembered the light. It crossed the completed family portrait without favor, falling over Everard, Harriet, and Philip alike. Beneath them stood one small wooden soldier with its hollow compartment open and empty. Nothing was hidden inside. No ribbon, no threat, no frightened truth waiting in darkness. Philip had chosen to stand for the portrait. Harriet had chosen to stay. And Everard had finally learned that love was not made honorable by possession, protection, or rank, but by attention, accountability, and the freedom to answer yes only after one had been allowed to say no.